Human saved alien girl from being slaughtered. 30 years later, she returned as queen. The cargo hold smelled like rust and fear. Garrett pressed himself against the bulkhead, one hand clamped over the alien girl's mouth, the other clutching his father's salvage knife, so hard his knuckles ached. 10 years old, and his heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted to escape, but he kept his breathing shallow, the way Dad taught him when hiding from pirates or customs inspectors. The girl trembled against his chest, her skin hot through his shirt, almost feverish. Blue skin, pink hair matted with dark purple blood, 4 golden eyes that had been wide with terror when he'd found her crouched behind a shattered cryopod, the gash on her forearm leaking all over the deck plating. He'd torn a strip from his own shirt to bind it, his fingers clumsy and shaking, while she'd made these small clicking sounds he thought might be crying. Footsteps echoed through the hull, heavy, deliberate, hunting. The weak one cannot have gone far. The voice spoke human standard with a harsh, clicking accent. The culling must be completed. Garrett's throat went dry. He'd seen executions before, out here in contested space, where laws were suggestions and survival meant looking away. But she was a kid, younger than him, and the way she'd looked at him when he'd stepped between her and the hunters, like he was something impossible and precious, made him feel brave and terrified in equal measure. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow fell across the cargo bay entrance. His father's voice drifted from somewhere forward, thin and rasping. "Nothing here but salvage. You're welcome to check, but we've got a medical emergency. Need to make port soon." "Your emergency is not our concern, human." "Yeah, well, your hunt isn't mine either. Check the bay if you want. Kid's up front helping me keep the nav system from crapping out." The shadow lingered. Garrett held his breath until his lungs screamed. The girl had gone completely still against him, her clawed hands gripping his arm with desperate strength. Then the footsteps retreated. They stayed frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When his father finally appeared in the doorway, moving slow like every step hurt, Garrett felt tears burn his eyes. "You did good, son." His father's hand settled on his shoulder, gentle despite the tremor in his fingers. "Real good. Now let's get her somewhere safe before those bastards change their minds." That was 30 years ago. The memory surfaced now like something dredged from deep water as Garrett stared at his scanner display, watching 30 ships arrange themselves in formation outside his repair station. The hulls gleamed with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm like living heartbeats suspended in vacuum. His station's comm crackled. "Unidentified fleet. You're in violation of approach protocols. State your business or I'll activate defense systems." Empty threat. His defense systems consisted of 2 outdated proximity mines and a sensor jammer that hadn't worked since the previous decade. But people didn't need to know that. Silence answered him. Then the comm lit up again, and a voice spoke in flawless human standard, formal and measured. "Garrett Solis, we request permission to dock. Queen Asherin of the Kelthar Empire has come to honor a debt owed." The wrench slipped from his fingers and clattered against the deck plating. Kelthar. The name pulled at something buried deep, and he found himself moving to his personal terminal, pulling up old logs with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. The entry was dated 3 decades back, written in the uneven handwriting of a child who'd just learned his father was dying. "Dad died today. I saved someone. I don't know if it was worth it." The words hit him like decompression. The blue girl, the pink hair, the desperate trust in those 4 golden eyes as she'd clung to him in the dark. "Permission to dock," he heard himself say, "Bay 3? He should have refused, should have told them to take their debt and shove it into the nearest star. The last time he'd helped the Kelthar, it had cost him everything. His father. His future. The authorities had blamed a 10-year-old orphan for delays that supposedly prevented medical treatment, conveniently ignoring their own bureaucratic incompetence. Easier to prosecute a kid who'd harbored an illegal alien than admit their own failures. But his feet carried him to the docking bay anyway, because somewhere in his chest, beneath 30 years of cynicism and scar tissue, that 10-year-old boy still lived. The one who couldn't walk away from someone bleeding and afraid. The airlock cycled. Garrett stood in the empty bay, grease still staining his hands from the oxygen processor repair, his heart doing that same frantic hammering it had done 3 decades ago. The hatch opened. Guards emerged first, tall and armored, their movements precise and deadly. Then she stepped through, and Garrett forgot how to breathe. 8 feet of sleek, powerful presence. Deep blue skin covered in scales that caught the harsh bay lighting and scattered it like oil on water. Pink hair woven into intricate braids threaded with metal. 4 golden eyes arranged in 2 horizontal pairs, giving her an unsettling breadth of vision. She wore armor that looked ceremonial, inlaid with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her heartbeat. She was magnificent, terrifying, nothing like the small, frightened child he remembered. Then she knelt. The movement shocked her own guards into frozen stillness. A queen kneeling before a station mechanic in clothes that smelled like engine grease and recycled air. "You were a child," she said, and her voice carried weight that made the deck plates seem to hum. "And you risked everything to save another child you didn't know. I have never forgotten." Garrett stared. His mouth opened, closed. He was trying to reconcile the regal figure before him with the girl who'd clutched his shirt with small, clawed hands, making those clicking sounds he'd later learned were Kael'thar weeping. Then he saw it. A thin scar running along her left forearm, barely visible beneath her scales. The same wound he'd bandaged with a strip torn from his own clothing, his child's hands clumsy but determined as purple blood had soaked through the fabric. The connection slammed into him with physical force. It was her. Impossibly, after 3 decades, it was her. She rose, fluid and controlled, and her 4 eyes searched his face like she was looking for something. Tensions between the Kael'thar Empire and human colonies escalate toward war. Your childhood act proves our species can coexist. I offer you a position as my consort and envoy, a bridge between our peoples. The words washed over him, barely registering. He was still stuck on the scar, on the memory of her small form pressed against his chest while hunters prowled outside, on his father's gentle voice saying, "You did good, son." "Garrett!" Mira's voice cut through the fog. She strode into the bay, her hand resting on the plasma pistol at her hip, her eyes darting between him and the Kael'thar Queen. "What the hell is going on? Human forces are mobilizing. They think this is an invasion." "It's not," Garrett managed. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. One of Ashirin's guards stepped forward, his burnt orange scales and cropped crest marking him as military. "If the human refuses, Kael'thar custom demands resolution through combat. The Queen's honor?" "Vishar." Ashirin's voice was soft, but the guard fell silent immediately. She looked at Garrett, and something in those 4 golden eyes made his chest ache. "I ask only that you hear me, nothing more." Mira touched his arm. "The last time you helped them, it cost you everything. I don't want to see you destroyed again." He knew she was right, knew that accepting anything from the Kael'thar would drag him back into a world that had chewed him up and spit him out as an orphan child with nowhere to go. Knew that the smart play was to refuse, to let her honor be satisfied some other way, to keep his quiet life on the edge of civilized space where nobody asked questions and nobody expected heroism. But he looked at Ashirin, at the scar on her forearm, and saw the frightened child who'd trusted him when she had no reason to trust anyone. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll hear you out." The weight of that decision settled over him like gravity. The Kael'thar flagship felt alive, the walls pulsed with bioluminescence, the organic architecture responding to Garrett's presence with shifts in light and temperature. The air tasted metallic, carrying a scent like ozone after rain. Each step on the yielding floor made him think of muscle tissue. His quarters were near Ashirin's chambers. Thera, the pale silver Kael'thar who served as the Queen's attendant, had shown him the controls before leaving him alone with his thoughts. A soft chime announced a visitor. Ashirin entered without waiting, having shed her ceremonial armor for something simpler. The bioluminescent patterns along her throat were more visible now, pulsing gently. "You're uncomfortable," she said. "Your ship is made of meat." Her crest rippled. "Biotechnology, more efficient than mechanical systems. The vessel heals itself, adapts to stress, requires minimal maintenance." "It's unsettling. Much as I found human ships unsettling, all those hard angles and dead materials, like traveling inside a corpse. She moved closer, then absently traced the scar on her forearm with one clawed finger. The gesture was unconscious, habitual. He'd seen her do the same thing as a child, touching the injury around his hands while he bandaged it. "Tomorrow we meet with human representatives," she said. "I need you to understand basic Kael'thar customs. Formal communication structure, appropriate gestures, what constitutes insult." They spent hours in a learning chamber. She taught him crest positions, how postures conveyed dominance or submission, the way bioluminescent patterns shifted with emotion. Her freckles brightened when focused, dimmed when tired. He was terrible at it, kept mixing up gestures. But she never lost patience, and when he finally got a complex greeting sequence right, her crest relaxed in what he recognized as approval. The diplomatic dinner was held in a neutral station. Garrett wore formal clothes that Mira had brought, feeling restricted and wrong. Ambassador Vance presided over the human delegation, his silver hair perfect, his smile practiced and empty. The meal was diplomatic theater until Vance decided to test the waters. "Queen Ashirin, there's been discussion about the incident 30 years ago. The culling rituals mentioned in official reports. Some colleagues find it troubling that your people would hunt their own children." Garrett's jaw clenched. Vance was undermining Ashirin by painting her species as savage. "She was 8 years old," Garrett said, his voice cutting through the polite conversation. "Bleeding out in a cargo hold because her own people decided she was disposable. If that's barbaric, Ambassador, then yeah, maybe it was. But the barbaric part was the hunters, not the kid trying to survive." Vance's smile tightened. "I meant no offense. You were observing that humans are morally superior because we don't ritually hunt children, except we do. We just call it something else. I was 10 when authorities blamed me for my father's death because prosecuting an orphan was easier than admitting their incompetence. Don't lecture me about barbarism." Silence fell. Ashirin's 4 eyes fixed on him, her crest absolutely still. "The human child you see as weak, Ambassador, is the reason I survived to claim my throne," she said, her voice carrying an edge. "His courage is the foundation of this alliance." Vance retreated behind diplomatic courtesy, but his eyes promised consequences. Later, Garrett stood on an observation deck, staring at stars through the transparent hull. His hands still shook from the confrontation. "You defended me." He turned. Ashirin stood in the entrance, her crest relaxed in a way he'd never seen. The tendrils unfurled slightly, revealing delicate membranes that caught starlight. He was an asshole. Many diplomats are. She moved beside him, close enough that he felt heat radiating from her scales. "But you didn't have to speak, could have remained silent." Old habits. Her bioluminescent freckles brightened. "I've spent 30 years trying to understand why a child would risk everything for a stranger." "After Dad died," he said slowly, "after they blamed me and I had nowhere to go, I kept thinking about you, wondered if you made it. Saving you was the only good thing I'd ever done. Everything else was just aftermath." Her crest drooped, patterns dimming. "I spent 30 years building myself into something worthy of your sacrifice, claimed a throne, united houses, led fleets, all so the boy who held my hand would see that his courage changed more than one life." The observation deck shuddered. Alarm screamed. Garrett's instincts kicked in. He tackled Ashirin as a plasma burst seared through space where her head had been. They hit the deck hard, tangled together, and her claws accidentally tore through his sleeve, drawing 3 parallel lines across his forearm. She froze, stared at the red staining his skin. For a moment they were both children again, blood and fear and desperate trust, and 30 years collapsed into nothing. Security flooded in. Veshar materialized, barking orders, weapon drawn. Garrett helped Ashirin up, his arm burning, and found her 4 eyes fixed on his face with startling intensity. "I'm fine, it's shallow." She reached out and touched the blood with one careful finger, like confirming it was real. The investigation moved quickly. Human extremist group Veshar reported, but evidence suggested someone within the Kael'thar court had leaked their location. Suspicion fell on both sides. Trust fractured as accusations flew. Garrett overheard Veshar speaking to another officer in what they thought was private. The translation interface caught every word. If the human continues to be a liability, we may need to remove him. The Queen's attachment clouds her judgment. You would act against her wishes? I would act to preserve the Empire. That's my duty. Garrett's blood went cold. He'd been a liability his entire life, a problem to be solved. He'd thought maybe this was different, that Asherin saw him as more than a useful tool. He found her in her chambers, surrounded by advisors and security. She looked up when he entered, her crest rising, but he cut through the formalities. Am I the child who saved you, or just a useful human to parade around for political advantage? The room went silent. Asherin dismissed everyone with a gesture, even Veshar. When they were alone, she turned those 4 eyes on him. I don't know, she said finally. The honesty cut deeper than any blade, because it meant she was as lost as he was, trying to reconcile memory with reality, and having no idea if what they were building could survive the weight of everything pulling them apart. Garrett demanded to return to his station. Asherin, bound by honor, allowed it. They parted without another word, but Thera slipped him a data chip before he left, her silver scales catching the corridor light. You don't understand the full truth yet, she whispered. The Queen has carried the weight of that day just as heavily as you have. Back on his station, Garrett isolated himself in his quarters. Mira tried twice to get him to talk, gave up when he wouldn't open the door. He sat at his terminal and loaded the chip. Files bloomed across the screen, official Kelthar records written in their formal script with human translations attached. He started reading. Subject: Asherin, bloodline contested, survived culling ritual through external intervention. Recommendation: immediate execution for violation of sacred tradition. Council decision: survival through non-Kelthar assistance nullifies ritual death. Subject permitted to live under probationary status. All future advancement must be earned through combat merit. More files, years of them. Combat records showing a young Asherin fighting challenge after challenge, earning every scrap of respect. Medical reports documenting injuries that would have killed most Kelthar. Psychological evaluations noting her refusal to display emotional vulnerability even under extreme duress. She'd nearly died for surviving. Had to fight for everything because a human child saved her life, and that made her weak in their eyes. Garrett's hands trembled as he scrolled deeper. Found a personal recording dated 15 years after the rescue. The timestamp marked her as barely into adulthood by Kelthar standards. He activated the playback. Asherin's younger face appeared, her scales brighter, her crest less disciplined. She sat in what looked like personal quarters, speaking in halting human standard. I practice every day, she said, her accent thick but determined. The language of the child who saved me. I want to understand what he said, the words he repeated while he stopped the bleeding. She paused, her 4 eyes glancing off camera like checking for observers. The translation programs tell me he said you're going to be okay 17 times. I didn't understand then, but now I think he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Her voice dropped lower. I don't know if he survived. Don't know if the human authorities punished him for helping me, but I remember his face, the freckles, the fear in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he tied the cloth around my arm. She took a breath, then spoke carefully, practicing each syllable. You're going to be okay. The recording ended. Garrett had to stop the playback because his vision blurred and his chest felt like it was collapsing inward. She'd learned his language because she wanted to understand what he'd said. Had spent 15 years wondering if he was alive, if he'd been punished, carrying the memory like a weight. He pulled up his own log entry from 30 years ago, the words written in a child's uneven hand, stared at it until the letters stopped making sense. Then he opened a new entry and added beneath it, Dad was right. Time to finish what we started. Meanwhile, Asherin stood in her private chambers aboard the flagship, her composure fractured. Thera found her staring at a small piece of faded cloth preserved in a transparent case. The strip of fabric was stained with old purple blood, the edges frayed and worn. You kept it? Thera said softly. For 30 years. Asheron's voice barely rose above a whisper. I built my entire identity around being worthy of the sacrifice a child made for me. Everything I've done, every throne I've claimed, every battle I've won. Also, when I found him again, he would see that his courage meant something. She set the case down with careful precision. But he looks at me with suspicion, wonders if I see him as a tool, and I couldn't answer because I don't know where the memory of that frightened boy ends and my need to repay a debt begins. Thera moved closer, her movements gentle. You love him. I don't know what that means for my species. Asheron's crest drooped. We don't bond the way humans do, don't build relationships on emotional vulnerability. But when I saw him standing in that docking bay, looking older and tired and still carrying the same defiant spark, I remembered. Something in me recognized home. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly, and then I drove him away with my uncertainty. A priority transmission interrupted them. There activated the display and Ambassador Vance's face materialized, his expression calculated and cold. Queen Asheron, I'm transmitting intelligence that suggests your fleet is preparing a first strike against human colonies. I'm afraid we have no choice but to mobilize defensive forces. The transmission cut. Asheron's crest snapped upright. That's fabricated. We have no such plans. It doesn't matter if it's true, Thera said grimly. If human forces mobilize, your fleet will interpret it as aggression. Both sides will escalate. Asheron pulled up tactical displays, her mind racing through scenarios. Someone wanted this war, someone on both sides coordinating to ensure the fragile peace shattered beyond repair. Mira intercepted the fabricated intelligence 12 hours later. She was running routine security checks on her ship's systems when she caught the transmission signature, traced it back through 3 proxy servers, and found Vance's digital fingerprints all over it. She tried to call Garrett. He didn't answer. So she overrode his door lock and found him at his terminal, eyes red-rimmed, watching the same recording on loop. The one where young Asheron practiced saying, "You're going to be okay," in careful, determined human standard. We have a problem, Mira said. Vance is trying to start a war. Garrett looked up, something shifting in his expression. Show me. She transferred the files to his terminal. Evidence of coordination between human and Kelthar factions, all designed to eliminate the possibility of peace. Fabricated intelligence, planned provocations, and buried deep in the communications, a schedule for an upcoming peace summit. With detailed plans for an assassination. They're going to kill her, Garrett said, his voice flat. Frame the other side for it. Make war inevitable. Yeah, Mira crossed her arms. So what are we doing about it? Garrett pulled up additional files Thera had included on the data chip. Security footage from 30 years ago, recordings he'd never seen. His father's gentle face appeared on screen, helping him hide a small blue child in the cargo hold. You did the right thing, son, Thomas Solis said in the recording, his voice weak but certain. Always do the right thing, no matter what it costs. The footage continued, showed his father buying them time with the hunters, lying to protect a child he'd never met. Showed him collapsing after they'd released Asheron into the nebula, his body finally giving in to the illness he'd been fighting. Showed 10-year-old Garrett trying to perform CPR with hands too small and unpracticed, crying and begging his father not to leave him alone. His father's last words, barely audible on the recording, "Proud of you." Garrett closed the file. His hands had stopped shaking. The guilt he'd carried for 30 years, wondering if his choice had killed his father, began to crack. Because the recording showed the truth. His father had been dying anyway, had known he was dying, and had chosen to spend his last hours helping his son do something brave. I'm going back, Garrett said. I'm stopping this. You'll need a ship. I'll need your ship. Mira grinned, thought you'd never ask. Veshar presented Asheron with an ultimatum from the Kelthar High Council. The holographic message played in her war room, the council elders' faces stern and unyielding. You will sever ties with the human and return home, or we will consider you unfit to rule. A more traditional leader will be installed in your place. Veshar watched her carefully. The council is right to be concerned. Your attachment to this human compromises your judgment. Ashirin stood perfectly still, her crest absolutely rigid. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every battle she'd fought, every challenge she'd survived. A child gave me life when my own people wanted me dead. I will not abandon him now, not for the throne, not for the council, not for anything. Then you choose him over the empire. I choose to honor the debt that made me who I am. If the council cannot understand that, then perhaps they've forgotten what honor means. Veshar's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make. A priority alert flashed across the tactical displays. Thera rushed in, her silver scales reflecting the red warning lights. Incoming transmission from Garrett's station. He says both human and Kelthar factions are planning to assassinate you at the Peace Summit. He has evidence. Ashirin's bioluminescent patterns flared bright. How did he? He's en route now. Says he's coming to finish what he started 30 years ago. For the first time since the observation deck incident, Ashirin felt something in her chest ease. Not certainty, not understanding, but hope, fragile and terrifying, that maybe the child who'd saved her and the man who'd walked away could find each other somewhere in the space between memory and possibility. Prepare security for the summit, she ordered, and make sure Garrett Solis has clearance to reach me, no matter what. Garrett infiltrated the Peace Summit using Thera's security code, his heart hammering as he navigated past guards from both species. The summit station was a neutral construct, all diplomatic polish and hidden weapons, every corridor monitored by surveillance he had to avoid. He found Ashirin in a private chamber surrounded by Kelthar dignitaries. Their conversation stopped when he entered. Her 4 eyes locked on his face, and her bioluminescent patterns flared with something that looked like shock and relief mixed together, the careful mask she wore for politics cracking just enough to show the person underneath. Garrett Solis has evidence of a coordinated assassination plot, he announced, moving to the center holographic display. Both human and Kelthar conspirators working together to ensure this summit fails. He uploaded the files Mira had recovered. Communication logs materialized in the air, showing Vance's coordination with Kelthar dissidents, planned provocations, staged intelligence, and buried in the data, detailed schematics of this very chamber with marked positions for concealed weapons. This is preposterous, one of the human diplomats said, but his voice wavered. Ashirin rose from her seat, her movements controlled but her crest rigid with barely contained fury. Security, scan this chamber for unauthorized weapons. The sweep took 3 minutes. Found plasma charges hidden in the environmental systems, rigged to detonate during the treaty signing. The yield would have killed everyone in the room and destroyed any hope of peace. Chaos erupted. Guards moved to apprehend suspects. Vance stood abruptly, reaching for something inside his jacket, but Mira materialized behind him and pressed a plasma pistol to his spine. Don't, she said conversationally. Veshar drew his weapon, but he wasn't aiming at the human conspirators. He pointed it at Garrett. You've poisoned the queen with human sentiment, Veshar said, his voice cold. Made her weak. Made her forget that survival requires strength, not attachment to a species that breeds chaos. Ashirin stepped between them, and her voice carried a weight that made the air feel dense. Lower your weapon, Veshar. I will not watch you destroy everything we've built for a human who saved my life when my own people would have let me die, a human who just exposed a conspiracy that would have killed us all. You call that weakness? You call that chaos? Her crest flared wide, every membrane visible, a display of absolute authority. I strip you of rank for treason. Guards, remove him. Veshar's face twisted, but he was surrounded. They took his weapon and escorted him out, his burnt orange scales seeming to dull as he left. The summit dissolved into emergency security protocols and diplomatic scrambling. Garrett found himself pulled aside by handlers and officials asking questions he barely registered. His mind was elsewhere, caught between the adrenaline crash and the memory of Ashirin's bioluminescent patterns flaring when she saw him. An hour later, she found him on an observation deck, the same kind where they'd nearly died together, though this one was different architecture, different station. He stood at the transparent wall, staring at the stars and trying to remember how to breathe normally. You came back, she said. He turned to face her. Yeah. After I couldn't answer your question, after I hurt you with my uncertainty. I watched a recording, he said quietly, of you learning to speak human standard, practicing the words I said to you, trying to understand what they meant. Her crest drooped. There, I shouldn't have. I also watched footage of my dad, security recordings from that day, saw him helping me hide you, saw him buying time with the hunters even though he was dying. Garrett's voice roughened. Heard him tell me he was proud, and I realized I've spent 30 years carrying guilt over a choice he supported, a choice that gave his last day meaning. He moved closer, and she went very still. I blamed myself for his death, thought saving you cost him medical attention he needed, but the footage showed the truth. He was dying anyway, and he chose to help, because it was the right thing to do. Garrett, let me finish. He reached up with trembling hands, cupping her face the way he had when they were children, and he was trying to keep her calm while bandaging wounds with inadequate supplies. I see both versions of you, the frightened kid and the powerful queen, and I've spent my whole life protecting people because protecting you felt like the only good thing I'd ever done. But watching you stand up to your own counsel, watching you choose honor over safety, I realized something. His thumbs traced the bioluminescent patterns on her cheekbones. They pulsed brighter under his touch. You don't need my protection. Never did. What we gave each other was something else. Courage, permission to be vulnerable when everything demanded we be strong. Asheron's 4 eyes closed. Her crest unfurled completely, every membrane exposed in a gesture he now understood meant absolute trust. When she spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I built an empire trying to be worthy of your sacrifice, but standing here now, I realize I don't need to be worthy. I just need to be honest. She leaned into his touch, her scales warm against his palms. The honest truth is, I've never stopped seeing you as the brave boy who held my hand in the dark, and I don't want to. He pulled her down gently, pressing his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. 2 frightened kids found courage in each other. Maybe that's all we need to find again. The human and Kael'thar governments, shaken by the conspiracy's exposure, agreed to a formal ceasefire. The evidence was damning enough that both sides had to acknowledge their internal corruption. Treaties were drafted, security protocols revised, and Asheron proposed something unprecedented, a formal alliance built on transparency and mutual defense, with human representatives integrated into Kael'thar diplomatic structures. The council resisted until Asheron reminded them that a child's courage had prevented a massacre at the summit. That same courage, she argued, could reshape how their species interacted. She named Garrett as the first human ambassador to the Kael'thar Empire. He protested, standing in her war room surrounded by tactical displays and bioorganic architecture. I'm not qualified. I fix oxygen processors and patch hull breaches. I'm not a diplomat. A 10-year-old boy with an oversized knife and a stubborn heart was qualified enough to change the fate of 2 species, she said. I think you can manage this. The formal ceremony was broadcast across both territories. Asheron stood before assembled fleets, Garrett beside her, and she spoke the words of Kael'thar bonding ritual. The vows involved intertwining their hands and speaking promises of mutual protection, each phrase carrying centuries of cultural weight. Garrett stumbled over the formal Kael'thar words, his pronunciation clumsy despite the hours she'd spent teaching him. Asheron's crest rippled in what he'd learned was amusement, and she smiled. It was slight, just a softening of her sharp features, but it transformed her entire face from regal to something warmer. She leaned close and whispered in human standard, her accent barely noticeable now. You're gonna be okay. The words hit him like decompression. The same phrase he'd repeated to her 3 decades ago returned to him in perfect pronunciation after years of her secret practice. His throat went tight. They retired to her private chambers after the ceremony, the fleets departing for their respective territories. For the first time since the reunion, they were truly alone without diplomatic pressure or assassination attempts. Asheron moved through the space with less formality, her posture relaxing. She retrieved the transparent case holding the faded strip of cloth and set it on the table between them. I kept this for 30 years. Garrett stared at the blood-stained fabric, purple and red mixing together. I still have the log entry I wrote the day Dad died. Never deleted it. May I see it? He pulled up the file on his personal device. The screen showed childish handwriting, uneven letters spelling out grief and uncertainty, and that final new line he'd added, "Dad was right. Time to finish what we started." She read it in silence, her bioluminescent freckles brightening. When she looked up, her 4 eyes glistened with something he recognized as tears, though they didn't fall the way human tears did. "We were both so frightened," she said softly. "We were kids trying to survive." She moved closer, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, clawed and scarred and completely different, but fitting together like they'd been designed for this. "And now?" "Now we're adults trying to build something better than survival." He squeezed her hand gently, "Something that includes each other." Ashirin rested her forehead against his again, that gesture of trust and intimacy that meant more than any formal vow. Her crest relaxed completely, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in slow rhythm with his heartbeat where their skin touched. "The boy who saved me," she whispered, "and the girl who remembered, we found our way back." "Yeah," he said, wrapping his arms around her, feeling the warmth of her scales and the steady rhythm of her breathing. "We did." Outside, the stars turned in their ancient patterns. 2 species moved toward an uncertain future, their alliance built on the courage of children who'd refused to let fear determine their choices. And in the quiet of private chambers, 2 people who'd carried each other's memory for 3 decades finally understood that coming home wasn't about returning to a place. It was about finding the person who'd been waiting for you all along.